Tonight we continue our conversation about America, the Clinton presidency, and the future. Tonight our guest is Tom Friedman, two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the New York Times. It is timely that he's here this evening because of the recent Palestinian-Israeli accord signed about Hebron by Prime Minister Netanyahu and Chairman Arafat. I am pleased to have Tom Friedman back on this broadcast. Welcome back.
Good to be here, Charlie.
Tell me the significance of this agreement initialed by the Israelis and the Palestinians.
I think the biggest significance of it is that it brings the other half of Israel into the Oslo peace process. We knew that 50% of Israel who voted for the Labor Party, who voted for the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, his successor Shimon Peres, they were ready for this process. They're ready for a withdrawal from Hebron. They're ready for the further withdrawals. They're ready, I think, in many ways for the big deal, a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, provided the Palestinians provide the security for Israel that it demands. But the other half of Israel was out of this process, the Likud half, the right half, as it were. The importance of this agreement yesterday, Charlie, is that it brings not all of the other half of the other half,
so you're not
I would say.
75%
exactly.
in favor of peace.
You now have a solid tent of Oslo. And what the Prime Minister did yesterday by bringing, as I say, half of his half in at least, is make that tent even more solid.
Before I talk about whatever happened to the Netanyahu who campaigned for the prime ministership and the one who's governing in 6 months, give me the sense of what they signed on to yesterday. What did the agreement say for both parties?
Well, basically what it did was, first of all, lay out the way in which Israel will withdraw its troops from the West Bank town of Hebron, where the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are buried, figures that are revered both by Judaism and Islam, and will turn over security to the Palestinians. 140,000 Palestinians, I believe, live in Hebron, something like that, 450 Jewish settlers in the heart of the city. They're going to be divided now. Palestinians will be in charge of their half of the city, the Israeli army still in charge of that enclave where the Jewish settlers live. Beyond Hebron, though, it laid down a roadmap of where we go from here. 3 more Israeli redeployments in the West Bank, more ceding of territory, that is, by Israel to the Palestinians, how much will be negotiated in each phase, then laying the stage for the final status negotiations over whatever is left.
So when it comes to the final status, the Palestinians will be occupying some 75 or 80% of the West Bank.
Depends how much, happens in these further redeployments, and that's going to be fought over and wrestled over and whatnot, but we've certainly got a pathway here that's going to take us into the next few years.
2 issues that the Palestinians may have conceded on. One is the covenant at long last. Yes?
It sounds like they're going to make whatever revisions or additions or amendations that the Israelis are demanding.
Secondly, what about extradition of those people the Israelis feel like have committed crimes against Israelis?
Certainly that was a major issue for Prime Minister Netanyahu. Evidently, again, there's been some understanding. All the details aren't clear here, what the trade-offs are going to be. Israel's still holding some Palestinian prisoners, so I have a feeling there may be some kind of trade-off in there in the mix.
You said in your column this morning that this is a strengthened Hebron, that Netanyahu strengthened it. Did he only do that to the extent that he legitimized and made Oslo more powerful, or did he make this particular agreement stronger from an Israeli point of view?
Charlie, I think only the experts can tell you that. I mean, frankly, but my own opinion is if Bibi Netanyahu wants to claim credit for having made Hebron stronger, more power to him. Yeah. He's entitled to the credit.
But he certainly legitimized the process by signing on.
Is the historical significance here is that he has joined Oslo. He is now an owner of Oslo. And that puts him in a totally different position, John. For the last 4 years, basically, Bibi Netanyahu has been an opponent of Oslo. He had every interest in saying this agreement is treasonous, it's dangerous,
it's an abomination. The agreement, so we don't have to
they've given absolute. He had every reason to find everything wrong with it.
So why did he sign on?
Now he has a reason to find things right with it. He's now a co-owner. That doesn't mean he's going to accept everything or turn the other cheek, if Arafat violates the agreement. But he is now a co-owner. He has a stake in its success.
Why did he change? What did he learn in 6 months? What mistakes, what kind of reality did he have to face in order to sign on?
I believed Netanyahu always had one choice when he came in. His choice was this: either blow up reality or blow up his party. either don't accept Oslo as the framework for Israeli-Palestinian peace, a framework that was accepted by half of Israel, by the Arab world, and the international community, and blow up reality, or do accept it and blow up your party.
And he's blown up his party.
First, he tried to blow up reality. First, we had the tunnel incident.
Well, before that, he refused to see Arafat.
What he tried to do was really test his ideology against reality. And what he got was an explosion. Okay? And I think what the explosion showed Prime Minister Netanyahu is that this is the price for turning away from Oslo. It is a return to the Intifada, the Palestinian uprising, constant grinding and tension with the Palestinians.
Oh, business relations, everything else frozen.
Everything. And what the Israeli, I think, middle class, silent majority, whatever you want to call them, was saying to be, look, if you want to go forward a little slower, a little more cautiously, a little safer, that's fine with us. But I'll tell you one thing we're not doing. We're not going backwards. And where you're taking us is backwards. And so in that sense, he confronted, I think, the reality that the Israeli public wants to keep going forward cautiously, carefully, with what I call the test of Oslo. Is there a Palestinian and Arab partner for the secure peace that Israelis are trying to get from Oslo? It's a test. It's a cautious, careful test. Israelis wanted that test to go forward. And I think once he recognized that that's where the Israeli silent majority was, that he was in a negotiation with Arafat, and the reason this weak little mayor of Gaza had more leverage over him, the superpower of Israel, was that Arafat had the Israeli silent majority on his side of the table.
They were always pushing Netanyahu.
They were always pushing Netanyahu. They were saying, see, what happened in Israel was that the Israeli silent majority thought Shimon Peres got too far ahead. He was going a little too fast. Then they were really ready to take. They yanked him back. When they sensed that Netanyahu was going too slow, they yanked him forward. That's what happened here. And when he did that, his choice, he had to basically blow up his party. Or he had to really split his cabinet. We'll see what happens to his party.
So when Ehud Barak says, look, he has one by one, Netanyahu signed on to all the things that he called criminal by Rabin and others, Peres. It doesn't really matter because he effectively has signed on to Oslo, and that's all that matters.
Charlie, it doesn't matter, but I'll tell you this. At this hour, there's two guys who I'm thinking about. One's in his grave and the other's in his cell. The one in his grave is the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. He was right. And let's not forget that at this moment. He gave up his life for being right about what Bibi Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, recognized today. Let's remember that. The other is Yigal Amir, the man who killed Mr. Rabin. Oh, he thought that he had God on his side. And he thought he had history on his side. And he thought he had the Israeli silent majority on his side. He was certain that he was acting in the name of the people of Israel and that by killing Rabin, he was going to reverse and halt this progress and this peace process. Yigal Amir was wrong. And this signing today, this buds for you, Yigal.
He thought he was acting in the name of his God, too, and he was wrong about that as well. Someone said about Netanyahu that he was always more interested in success than ideology. That in the end, he was inevitably going to come to this point because success was more important to him in the best sense of that word. His own success, yes. Israel's success.
I just didn't know. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu sincerely believed what he believed when he came into office. But I think he was sincerely, had not really exposed himself to the evolution and the revolution in a way that had happened in the Middle East. And I'll say one thing to his credit. What he did yesterday, took some guts. I mean, you can say he was driven by reality, explosion, a desire to succeed and win a Nobel Peace Prize too. But basically, he swallowed a huge amount of his own words. And he went against his own party because he sensed that's where the public's interest was. And I think he made a mess of a lot of things when he came in. But for that, I give him credit. That took a lot of guts, too. And for that, I think we got to give him a little bit of credit.
Might it be worth it because he, as you say, legitimizes, reinforces the process? Somehow, whatever Israel has had to go through the last 6 months, somehow, or can that a silly argument to make, because it slowed down the momentum.
It slowed down, though. He paid a huge price. He still has a deeply dysfunctional relationship with Yasser Arafat.
And trust was always at the issue of them not being able to move forward.
King Hussein and Hosni Mubarak. Now, that's not all his fault either. I mean, there's blame aplenty to go around here. But, Charlie, this is a relationship that only works by trust. You know, my sense of the Middle East, I may have said this to you before, is that in the peace process, you know, you're always going into a howling wind. And Rabin and Peres and Arafat, as long as they, Mubarak and Hussein, as long as they went arm in arm into that howling wind, they could stand up to it.
Could weather anything.
But man, once you split up, it'll just bowl you over, you know. And what Arafat and Rabin and Peres came to understand through a difficult process is that ultimately neither could succeed without the other. And one hopes that if they aren't there yet, that's where they're heading, that Prime Minister Netanyahu and Yasser Arafat are learning that same lesson.
What should we look to over the next 2 years between now and 1998, the end of 1998, when Israeli redeployment is supposedly taken place? What could derail this?
Well, I'll tell you what I look for, and then we'll see what could derail it. I look for the new debate. The new debate in Israel, I think you're going to see it more quickly than you can imagine, is that the right will split now. Half the right, I believe, will join with the left and the Labor Party in a new discussion. And that is, folks, there is going to be a Palestinian state. So maybe we have an interest in shaping it by taking the initiative and the high ground and saying, okay, there can be a Palestinian state, but we want X, Y, Z, and D. You know, we want it to have these characteristics that will secure Israel.
He's already beginning to speak that way.
Exactly.
I mean, in an interview with me, he talked about sovereignty,
absolutely,
his definition,
he's almost there,
looking for a new model and
exactly.
all that.
And I think so. The big debate will be the Likud model of a Palestinian state, the Labor model of a Palestinian state, and the Palestinian model of a Palestinian state. The other half of the right, I think, is going to go to the barricades. And I'm worried.
These are the religious elements,
exactly.
these are the settlers,
religious
these are people...
nationalist elements that I think they are deeply committed to their perspective. This is a body blow to them. This is a shock. And losing Prime Minister Netanyahu is very important for them because in many ways Prime Minister Netanyahu was their bridge to the center. See, one of his strengths as a politician was that he both shared their right-wing agenda, so they thought, but he was acceptable to the center. That's why he could win and, say, Ariel Sharon, former defense minister, could not. He could be Prime Minister, Netanyahu. Now, the right's bridge to the center here has been broken. It's collapsed. And so
they have nowhere to go.
They have nowhere to
the
go.
Barricades.
Exactly. That's what I worry. And I hope what you'll see is that half of the half now will keep moving, and
And Netanyahu is in the center. He is now a center right. He's now center right.
He's now center right.
And he's trying to bring ahead a coalition with center left people, trying to get them to support his center right position.
But I think now he has really moved fundamentally to the center.
And Tom Friedman, with all his experience and all that he's done in the Middle East, says it is inevitable that there will be a Palestinian state on the West Bank sooner than you expect.
Well, there's a process here. There's a time schedule, but it'll be part of the final status here. There will be a Palestinian state.
And somehow Jerusalem will be involved in it. Yet to be determined.
Yet to be determined. I don't want to make any predictions about that, but there will be a state of some size or another, of some characteristic or another, and I hope that what Prime Minister Netanyahu has learned from this process is that if I define it, if I get ahead of it, if I give my own stamp to it, instead of being dragged into it kicking and screaming, I'm going to have a lot more leverage with my own people, with the international community, with the Americans, and with the other side.
Let me move to another issue. McDonald's, the golden arch theory of Friedman. It is this notion that there's a kind of conflict avoidance from the presence of a McDonald's franchise in your country. Because if you have McDonald's franchises, it signifies to that country and its people a certain level of economic maturity, a certain level of economic development, a certain stake in the global order, so that you do not want to risk that because it benefits all of your consumers and all of your people. And therefore, says Mr. Friedman, if you have a McDonald's in your country, you're not going to go to war with another country that has a McDonald's in their half tongue-in-cheek, he says this, because you got too much of a stake in something else. Tell me about this theory.
So I'm traveling around the world. As you know, we've had these discussions along the way. I've been to, 40 countries in the last couple of years. And I have to admit, I like McDonald's. I like my occasional burger and fries when I'm on the road. Yeah. And so I eat at McDonald's in every country I go to. I started to notice something. I started to notice that no two countries that both had a McDonald's had ever fought a war with each other. And I just sort of started tracking this. I said, you know, one day I'm going to check this out. So I went to Chicago, McDonald's headquarters in Oak Brook, Illinois, Hamburger University, HU as they call it. I put my thesis on the table, had them run the computer, you know, mob.
Yeah.
I was kind of worried about the Falklands War.
Yeah,
I thought Argentina might have had a
But
McDonald's
timing was
then,
on your side.
But they hadn't. And they confirmed it.
Right.
No two countries that both had a McDonald's had ever fought a war against each other. So I sort of developed what I call my Golden Arches theory of conflict prevention.
Right.
And the Golden Arches theory of conflict prevention states that once a country reaches the level of economic development that it can afford to have a network of McDonald's, because McDonald's never just puts one into a country, they always go into with a network, that country becomes a McDonald's country. And in a McDonald's country, people don't like to fight wars. They like to wait in line for burgers.
All right. And so what we should all be doing is encouraging the growth of McDonald's. A new McDonald's opens somewhere in the world every 3 hours.
Right.
There's your fact for today,
That's
America.
right.
You know? Now, your point is that it does not stop conflict within boundaries because
basically this era we're going into, I believe, is an era. I've often said this to you, Charlie, when people say, what do I do for a living? I say, I cover the wars between winners and losers within countries. Right. And that's why it's interesting. When the McDonald's opened in Minsk, there was a riot last month. Someone called me, a reporter, and said, hey, Friedman, well, where's your thesis? You said, I said, wait a minute. I said, inside countries, because inside countries there are those who will eat the Big Mac, and there are those who fear the Big Mac will eat them.
i.e. loss of their cultural identification.
Exactly. Loss of their cultural identity. That globalization, as it comes to their country, will take away their culture, their traditions, okay, their eating habits, and at the same time, it is producing a gap between winners and losers, those who can afford to take advantage of McDonald's and Pizza Hut and IBM and Macintosh, and those who are going to be left behind by this process of globalization. Now, as you said, this was a tongue-in-cheek theory, and all I was really trying to point out was this, that economic development, integration, and globalization does give countries and governments a certain stake in not becoming adventuresome abroad, because you will be punished by the global economy.
You wrote another column, not about this, in which you talked about find me Mr. Bekel, and in fact, in which Egyptians, when they were at the worst of the conflict between the new Netanyahu government and feeling some sense of loss and some sense of things were turning back, Egyptian businessmen heard that there was a Mr. Bekel who knew how to grow tomatoes in the desert.
Exactly.
And everybody said, show me Mr. Bekel, show me Mr. Bekel. The idea that economics is now so central to. You also praise Disney for standing up to China, and you make the argument that the Chinese, which is a surprise to me, will succumb to sophisticated leverage if it is shown wisely how it is in their interest.
Exactly. I think that's really the key. You know, the argument I just made the other day. I was in Hong Kong last month. I noticed the Shenzhen and Shanghai stock markets collapsed when I was there. 2 days in a row, almost melted down. Well, what was that about? What was that about? These are underregulated, highly underregulated stock markets. They got no free press in China. They got no Barron's, no Business Week, no Wall Street Journal, no New York Times, you know, to keep track of markets and companies and insider trading and whatnot. And I did a column, and I basically said, you know what, China's going to have a free press. China's going to have a free press because China today has 21 million shareholders now. 21 million people in the stock market.
And they want
a tiny number
information.
But they want accurate information. And so my basic point is this. Let's look for those areas. Now, the government also needs this, because if people lose money in the market, they go into the street and riot. And they want the government to come in and bail them out, and the government can't afford to do that. Let's look at, the way I always say about China, you know, China's huge and rapid economic growth actually allows it to deflect external pressure. Because they can just come along and we say, hey, China, do this and that. They say, hey, look, we can buy Boeing, we can buy Airbus, don't much matter to us. They can just dangle those big contracts in front and we all shut up. But what they can't deflect is that the same economic growth is actually fueling internal pressures. It's creating whole new interest groups, shareholders, workers, you know, who want certain workers' rights now, that the government has a self-interest in addressing and satisfying. And what I say, in terms of our dealing with China and human rights, let's find the areas where we can work with their own self-interest.
You also say the Chinese don't appreciate that they make it very hard to like them in the United States. Absolutely. And that does not work in their favor. And there was a hurrah for Disney when it said, not us, thank you very much, we'll pass.
Absolutely. You know what, and that's something I think they got to recognize. That, you know, I consider myself someone not hostile to China in the sense that I understand that it's a country going through a very difficult 1.2 billion people trying to go through a rapid economic modernization. That is not an easy process. And I'm ready to sit down, okay, and think that through and be sensitive to some of the difficulties they're going through. But I'm not ready. When they start telling me I can't make movies about things just because they're big, okay, and it's that has really bothered me about China. They've made it very hard for people who want to at least be understanding about their difficulties, I think, to really be sympathetic, because they go too far. And I think they're really hurting themselves. And in the long run, I think it'll blow up in their face.
It's great to have you here. Thank you very much.
A pleasure.
Tom Friedman, New York Times columnist. We'll be right back. Shimon Peres is here, and we'll talk about his reaction to the Hebron Accord.